Live from Washington, this is BBC News. A Manhattan jury finds Donald Trump guilty on all counts in his New York hush money case. Mr. Trump becomes the first U.S. president to be convicted of a crime.
This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people.
After the 6-week trial, Manhattan's District Attorney Alvin Bragg defends the jury's verdict.
The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Hello, I'm Carl Nassman. Welcome back to our continuing coverage. A Manhattan jury has found former President Donald Trump guilty on all 34 charges in his New York hush money trial. He's now the first U.S. president, former or serving, that's been convicted of a crime. Mr. Trump was convicted of falsifying business records to cover up a hush money payment made to the former porn star Stormy Daniels. Now, the verdict was handed down just a few hours ago in New York. It comes after 2 days of deliberations by the jury. The former U.S. president could face up to 4 years in prison and a $5,000 fine for each count. Here now is more of what he said outside the court right after that verdict. A lot to break down now on that historic decision by that jury today, and joining me to do just that is trial attorney and legal analyst Kelly Hyman. It's great to have you back on BBC News. I just want to ask you, first of all, what stood out to you about today's verdict in that Manhattan courtroom?
It's a historic day, and we have to remember this is the first time in U.S. history where a former president of the United States has been charged and convicted of felony crimes. That really stood out. And the fact that the jury really took their time, very methodically, asking for evidence back, asking for certain things, that they really thought about this and understood that this was going to be a monumentous decision on their part.
Were you surprised at all? I mean, you said they took their time, but in the end, it was only a couple of days, wasn't it, in terms of deliberations? Was that about the amount of time you thought they'd spend on this?
I thought it was going to go till Friday and then Friday, but I did predict, and they have me on the tape on CNN saying that I believed that it was going to be convicted on all 34 counts.
Wow. So just walk us through, I mean, briefly, but 34 counts. What is the legal significance of the actual verdict that was handed down? There could be jail time, there could be fines, it could be a mix.
Right. And people always ask, like, what's next? What's going to happen? So we know the judge has set the sentencing for July 11th, right? And that's when, at that time, the judge will sentence Donald Trump. And at that point in time, he will be a convicted felon. He is not a convicted felon until then. But in the meantime, before that happens, they will most likely, defense counsel, Trump's team, will file a motion to set aside the verdict. And that could potentially delay the sentencing in the case.
And just to be clear, that kind of motion is different from an appeal.
Correct. So that motion to set aside the verdict would potentially happen before the fact of the sentencing, right? In between that. So most likely the sentencing time, if that happens, will get delayed, right? That will get pushed back. And then once the sentencing happens and he is convicted, becomes a convicted felon, and the judge issues the punishment that we talked about, whether jail time, which is probably unlikely, or the fact that he has some kind of probation, then at that point, his attorneys can file an appeal.
And we've seen many of those sorts of tactics to push back a timeline has been very successful in many of the other criminal cases facing Donald Trump. Let's talk about the sentencing. A lot of this, isn't it, or nearly all of it, comes down to the discretion of the judge in this case, Juan Merchan. What do you expect to happen if, indeed, we see that sentencing taking place on July 11th?
So going back in June, both sides have to give the court a memo, basically a sentencing memo laying out what they think, right? So from the defense, no sentencing, and then for the state, depending on what they feel is appropriate, whether it is jail time or some kind of probation, and then ultimately the judge will consider that. Also, in the meantime, Donald Trump has to go to the probation office. He has to sit for an interview where they discuss with him, and they also issue a report. Ask him about, his job prospects. We all know what his job prospects
aiming for
are.
A pretty big job, isn't
right?
he?
Yes, he is. And talk to him, about that. And then they issue a report as well. And then ultimately, it'll be the judge's discretion. But most likely, due to Trump's age, 77 years old, this is a first-time offender. Most likely, I do not see any jail time.
All right, well, that's really interesting stuff, and that is the kind of the timeline that we can expect there. Kelly Hyman, trial attorney and legal analyst, always great to have your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Well, that was the legal side of things, and obviously there's political fallout here as well. And to talk about that, we have Axios senior contributor Margaret Tlaib and Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank. It's great to have you both here. Everyone talking as well about the historical significance. We can't call him a convicted felon yet, as we just heard. That will come after sentencing. But Margaret, can you just walk us through your thoughts here and really Donald Trump once again entering the history books in a way that many people may not have expected?
Yeah, Carl, he has a real knack for making history, but he has outdone himself with this jury verdict earlier today. There are a couple of contours to watch, and one is that for many months it was thought, the polling suggested among American voters, that voters would be much less likely to want to support a nominee or a candidate for president if they had been criminally convicted. I think we're about to find out whether that conventional wisdom is right or not right, and with how many voters. We've certainly seen early signs that it will only further motivate the Republican base. You've seen everyone from House Speaker Mike Johnson to Senator Lindsey Graham to the rank and file of much of the Republican Party coming out today and panning the jury verdict and sort of echoing the former president's words about rigged or disgrace, or he's going to win on appeal. We saw Larry Hogan, the former Republican governor of Maryland, which is a Democratic state, of course, and who's running for the Senate now, trying to beat the odds and win the Senate seat as a Republican. We saw him come out and say, no matter what this verdict is, before the verdict, people should respect it and the law and the jury. And the Trump campaign immediately pan him and say, your campaign is over. So the battle lines are being drawn. But if this race come November is as close as the early polling suggests it could be, if it really is within the margin of error, a percentage point or two, even if it only moves a marginal number of Americans, that could make a difference. And so the political stakes are huge. We certainly expect
stakes there, really. And Dana Milbank, I mean, what do you think? How will this ruling by this jury today, convicting on all counts, change the nature of what is already, as Margaret said, a very tight campaign?
Well, it's anybody's guess, because we've never had a convicted felon at the top of a ticket running for president from a major party in the United States before. So we really can't predict. The more recent polling, more recent than what Margaret was talking about, suggests that people, first of all, haven't been paying much attention to the trial at all, and probably aren't going to change votes very much. Things are very polarized here. It suggests people are unlikely to change their vote on the basis of this trial. But look, if you had the choice between running for president as a convicted felon or not running as a convicted felon, you'd probably prefer not to be a convicted felon. So, it'll take some time for us to really find out what's going to happen politically with this. But already the trial has had a real impact, because look, for 5 weeks, Donald Trump has been sitting in that courtroom. His campaign has been singularly focused on this trial, while the Biden campaign, though trailing in the polls, has actually been out there setting up its infrastructure in the battleground states and sort of doing the bread and butter that needs to be done to win the election in the fall. So I think the distraction that this has caused for the Trump campaign has been the most damaging thing so far. That's the only thing we can conclusively say.
Well, Margaret, what do you think the Biden campaign and the Biden administration will do here? We saw actually nearly a few minutes after this verdict was announced, a press release sent out by the Biden-Harris campaign with a reaction and a fundraising letter, a call to vote in November. Will this become a big political issue on the Democratic side as well?
Yeah, certainly you're going to get the fundraising calls from both gentlemen, and you're going to get the efforts to message around it. But what we haven't seen is President Biden himself come out swinging. That immediate statement came from a spokesperson for the campaign. And I think what we've seen in early signs from other Democratic leaders, such as Chuck Schumer in the Senate, is to use a rarer, let's say, economy of words, and to say things like, all that matters is what the jury did, or the jury has spoken, or, the verdict speaks for itself, or that sort of thing. I think there's going to be a desire to sort of tread carefully at first and calibrate it because, again, of the sensitivities that, certainly Donald Trump has been trying to suggest that Joe Biden has had a hand in this, or it's political, that as if Joe Biden had anything to do with what the prosecutor in Manhattan was doing. But that is an argument that resonates certainly with the Republican base and perhaps with some centrist voters. So President Biden has largely kept a hands-off approach. They're going to try to presumably calibrate what's the best way to follow. But I think we are absolutely going to see on the Republican side a messaging around the idea that it's a disgrace or the justice system is corrupt, et cetera, et cetera. And on the Democratic base side, an argument that this proves that Trump is unfit for office. One question, though, is how will President Biden put his thumb on the scale? And I think they're still testing the water, it looks like.
Well, Dana, you said before, we've never seen anything quite like this. What kind of era of presidential campaigning and presidential politics do you think we're entering here? We saw some of the scuffles outside the courthouse among, Trump supporters and Trump critics. And of course, this is all coming just a few years after January 6th. What might we see going forward in these next months? In what was already a very contentious campaign?
Carl, the only thing we can be sure of is we have no idea what's coming next. Nothing has been ordinary about this campaign. We're going to have a debate in just a few weeks. That's never happened before the fall election season before. And, what we've seen so far is it's always, to expect the unexpected. It's going to be something that we don't know enough about to talk about right now. Other things are going to enter into this race. But look, you can be sure that Biden will find a way to slip in at the debate in other moments that his opponent is a convicted felon. And that's certainly going to be part of the baggage. It's going to remind people of why they were upset with Trump in the first place, going to remind them about January 6th. So we don't know overall what the net impact is going to be, but there's certainly going to be a serious amount of impact here.
Margaret, very briefly, about 30 seconds left here, but there are dangers, of course, of the temperature heating up a bit. Who do you think might be able to, are there figures in the Republican Party or Democratic Party to turn that temperature down a bit?
It's a really good question because the moment is so incredibly polarized in this country. People get their news from different places, their messaging from different places, their understandings of reality from completely different places. And when the parties are trying to turn out voters, they are trying to turn out their bases. If they pick up some persuadable voters along the way, great. But in the last couple of election cycles, we have seen the courtship of the base. And the bases move by the extremes. And that is the danger we're at right now.
It is uncharted territory in many ways. Thank you to you both for helping us to chart it a bit. Axios senior contributor Margaret Tlaib and Dana Milbank, Washington Post columnist. Thank you to you both.